Hi, I'm Paul Watson, and you're listening to the CDM Podcast. Like, share, 5-star rate, and review this podcast. You can listen to our full premium content by becoming a $5 a month supporter on our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/faithworks, patreon.com/faithworks, or just click on the link right in the description. To those of you who already support this podcast, thank you so much. Your support helps us put tools in the hands of men and women like you who want to experience a disciple-making movement in their own neighborhood. If you haven't downloaded the CDM app yet, what are you doing? It's available on the Google Store and on the iTunes Store, and you just type in Contagious Disciple Making and download it free to your phone and access a ton of content, whether it's whiteboard videos to describe various things that we talk about in our podcasts, all of our free versions of the podcast, as well as links to go in and immediately listen to part 2 if you want to, if you're already a member of our Patreon page, blog posts and event calendars and updates and announcements as to upcoming classes. I mean, there is so much there. And if you're looking for a community to join, you go right down to the CDM prayer page, click on it. It'll take you straight through all the stuff on Facebook directly to the CDM prayer page. And we want you to be a part of that so you can post your prayer requests that come as you are making disciples and helping people fall in love with Jesus. Now, today's content is all about becoming anti-fragile. That may not be a word you've heard before, but I'm going to go ahead and describe it in this part 1 and why it's so important and what it takes to get there. The second part of our podcast is going to deal with building community and being in community and some tips that we have learned, some counterintuitive tips, I might add, that we have learned to help you build and be a productive part of a community. So that will be part 2 of the podcast for those of you who are our premium subscribers. If you want to listen to part 2, just go on over our Patreon page and be able to subscribe for $5 a month. You will not only get this podcast, this part 2 of this podcast, but you'll also have access to all of our premium content archives right there for $5. Okay. Let's jump in right now. So I am a big fan of the podcast Art of Manliness. I think it's an amazing podcast. It has a wide variety of topics. It keeps me growing and thinking outside of my normal box and spheres and all of those kind of things. And I like it because God will often use things that they're talking about in that podcast to spark a chain of thought that changes my understanding or helps refine my understanding of people and of helping them make disciples and of disciple-making movements. Although it is not a disciple-making movement podcast, it is not a Christian podcast, but God will speak through that content and help me because I'm always looking for ways to get better, ways to improve. And I believe that you are as well. So in one of those podcasts, Brett McKay was interviewing a guy, an author of a book called AntiFragile, and he explained an interesting concept. He talked about how things, when they begin, they're in this fragile state. And in this fragile state, it requires everything to go right in order for it to succeed, in order for it to sustain. For those of you who may have started a Discovery Bible study, this is the Discovery Bible study that you have to show up in, the meeting that you have to be there, or it won't happen. You see, if you get a flat tire on the way there, they'd rather cancel than to continue without you. Some of you might think that's a good thing. It is not. You don't want that if you're focused on movement. That is very fragile. And Brett and this author used the mythological image of the sword of Damocles to describe this thing. The sword of Damocles was suspended over Damocles' head by a thread, and if he did one wrong thing, then boom, that thread would snap and the sword would fall and kill him. That's what fragile is. And all of us, when we get started in disciple-making movements, begin there. If we don't show up and drive prayer, prayer doesn't happen. If we don't show up to the disciple-making communities, they don't meet. If we don't show up for the Discovery Bible studies, then it doesn't happen. If we're not engaging the lost, then no one else that we know of in our town is doing it in a way that would lead to movement. things begin and they're fragile, but they shouldn't stay there. They should progress towards the next phase, which is resilient. And the word resilient is best described by the phoenix, that it can burn to the ground but then rise up from the ashes. A resilient Discovery Bible study is one of those Bible studies that if you show up, it meets and does well. If you miss one because of a flat tire, it continues to meet and does well. Steady on, it holds its own, and it is much more tolerant of the natural volatility of life. Now, a lot of organizations believe that that is the goal. We want groups like that, want groups that kind of need us, but also don't, and that would grow and move along, and that's wonderful. And by grow, I mean in terms of numbers, in terms of the experiences of the people in them. But for those of us focused on disciple-making movements, we can't stop there. We need to progress to the next phase. The next phase is AntiFragile. And AntiFragile can be best described by the mythological creature, the Hydra. This was a creature that if you cut off one of the heads of this monster, then two heads would grow in its place. It got stronger in adversity. And we want to see groups that won't just continue meeting if we don't show up. We want to see groups that multiply, that make disciples, that help people fall in love with Jesus, even if we're taken out for a couple of weeks or more because of COVID, or a month or more because we're dealing with a family crisis or something like that. You want to come back and realize that in your absence, 15 people have been baptized. And they were people that weren't being reached until after you had withdrawn. That's what AntiFragile is. And you might think, well, is that even possible? Absolutely. In every movement on the planet, we see a lot of anti-fragile behavior. Just think of China, for example. When the missionaries were thrown out of China and that bamboo curtain came up, we thought the church would have almost entered into extinction, if not entirely entered into extinction. And people were shocked when they got into the country, when the bamboo curtain started to split just a little bit. We got people into the country and found a growing, thriving church. Not a perfect church, but a growing and thriving church, one that was bigger than when they had left it. That's anti-fragile. We saw the same thing happen in India. Often, we would hear people being martyred in various villages. And then at the annual conferences, they would have this ceremony where they'd read out the names of those who had been martyred and the villages and areas that they were going into to share the gospel and to make disciples. And they would sit there and say, who will take their place? And anywhere from 2 to 10 people would raise their hands and at the end of the ceremony, gather their belongings and head out to carry the message of the kingdom of God to a place where people had been martyred for doing the very thing. And in every case, it exploded in that area, and God's kingdom came, and his will was done, and he received glory, and people's lives were changed. That's what anti-fragile is all about. Now, one of the things that Brett McKay and the author didn't do in their podcast was to talk about how to move from fragile to anti-fragile. And that's something that we've done here at CDM quite a bit, is to really ponder that and say, how can we make this tangible? That it's not just something you hope to get to, but something you can begin to adopt certain patterns and habits and help move the needle from fragile to anti-fragile. And so we've hit on 4 different things in order to help make that happen. I want to share those with you today. We cover all of this and much, much more in our class. If you have not attended CDM University, you should. It's a 13-week class where we go through the scriptural basis and history of movement. We go into the counterintuitives. We go into all 25 5 of the strategic elements. Most trainings only cover the first 7. And we cover what's called like the big 4, which are applications of these movement principles into very specific areas, including how do we create a prayer movement? What is the role of legacy, church, and movement? By the way, it's a very positive role. How do we mobilize Christians out of churches into being disciple makers focused on movement and all of that? And if you download our app, you'll be able to hear all about that. But we covered this topic there, and it's one of my favorite topics. Let me go ahead and dive into those 4 things to help move that needle from fragile to anti-fragile. The first one is you have to be a personal practitioner. You've got to do the things. You've got to have your prayer calendar. You've got to go out and engage the lost. You've got to help other believers go and do the same thing and with you as you are doing it, with the goal to see movement in your area. Now, you may not have a lot of time. I don't have a ton of time. I'm coaching between Rebecca and I and the CDM team. We're working with 85 men and women all over the world, helping coach them. And I love doing it. And I want to bring in more and be able to help them do what God's put in their heart. But it means I just don't have a lot of time. But even this weekend, I picked my daughter up, she's 11, Keturah, and we went to the local Warhammer store that I've identified as a place that I want to engage men and find people who are looking for God. And so we sat there, Keturah and I, we visited with the manager there. We talked about a few things. We were reminded that they have a Friday night, game night that we can go to and all of that. And as I'm leaving the place, I'm talking with Keturah about the conversation quadrants and talking about casual and meaningful and spiritual and discovery conversations. And then talking about why we have those conversations and then asking her what she thought the conversations were like there at the place. So not only am I spending time with my daughter and doing something that is fun, but I'm also doing it and engaging the lost and showing her how to engage the lost as well. We have to be personal practitioners. There are things that you cannot learn if you don't do. And I don't like the fact that many people see themselves as trainers or coaches or mentors in movement without having tried to live the habits in their life. They don't always have to start a movement, but they need to have the habits and have fruit and have helped others to bear fruit as well. So first of all, in order to move from fragile to anti-fragile, you must be a personal practitioner. That means right now, if you haven't done your prayer calendar in a while, you need to get back on that thing. And you need to start making phone calls. If you haven't engaged the lost in a while, you need to find a hobby. You need to find a place where you can volunteer to be around people who don't know Jesus, or you will always be in a fragile state and wonder why you're not seeing movement. The second thing is you have to bring people along with you. You go wide. You sit there and you invite people and to do this thing with you. And you don't have to be an expert. You don't. Because the invitation is not, come do what I tell you to do. The invitation is, hey, I'm trying some stuff in my life that I'm hoping God will use to bring him honor and glory. And I am learning and I'm making mistakes, and I just want some friends that I could sit there and do this with and bounce ideas off of, and we can learn from one another. Would you come with me? I'm heading to the Warhammer store this weekend. Would you just like to tag along with me? And we're going to go meet some great people, and we're going to have fun. Okay? So that's the next phase to help it move, because now it's a different skill set, right? You go from doing it to now you go to helping other people do it with you. And that's an important skill set to start bringing it from anti-fragile to resilient. From fragile to resilient to anti-fragile. Okay? And so you're helping someone else try. All right? The next thing we do is we want to go deep. We want to start driving down generations. And the way to do that is that person that you invited to go with you, it's to help them help someone else. So in the prayer calendar, I may have my personal prayer calendar and I'm calling people and praying for them. And then I find some people that are being really responsive, enthusiastic. And I go, hey, do you want to have a prayer calendar of your own? You can do this too. And so they create their own prayer calendar. And then every couple of weeks, we call one another and we share notes as to what the Lord is doing and how he is working through us. And then later on, I might look at that person and say, you know what? We are having so much fun here. Is there anybody in your prayer calendar that may want to do this too? And so now they, in turn, help the next person start their own prayer calendar, because that's another skill set, right? You do it, you help someone else do it, and then you help someone else help someone else. And it goes down from personal practice to going wide to now going deep. And that will take you from fragile to anti-fragile a lot faster. Because remember, in a tag-along situation, let's say two of you, you're going 2 by 2, kind of like Luke chapter 10 tells you to, right? You're going 2 by 2. And so now if, let's say, you get a flat tire, but your friend can make it to the Discovery Bible study, but even better, that friend now has helped the Discovery Bible study learn how to do this for themselves, so that now you're just coaching that internal leader of that Bible study. So you see that? 3 generations, you, them, the person inside, and it becomes less fragile. But that's not where things need to stop, because that brings up the fourth one. And the fourth one I'm going to touch on here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in detail in the second half of this podcast. But the fourth one is community. If you want to be truly anti-fragile, you need to be able to gather communities around things in order for them to be sustained. So if you have prayer calendars, eventually you're going to want to invite all the people that have prayer calendars to come together to share what the Lord is doing and to pray for the community together. You see? So now it comes from individual practice to helping other people do it, to going in depth, and now saying, hey, let's come together. Let's be in community. The shared practice. The invitation to community is this one. It's my favorite. It's, hey, there are other weirdos just like you that are out there. You want to meet a few of them? And we come in and we be weird for Jesus together. Of course, growing up in the era of DC Talks, I can truly say we become Jesus freak. We become Jesus freaks. And so that's how we go, those 4 things, from personal practice to width, inviting others to do it, to helping them invite others, to getting that depth, and finally building a community. That's how you move from fragile to anti-fragile. You might think, community? Really? Really? I'm like, yes, think about it. Think about Alcoholics Anonymous. It creates a community of people to surround an addict to help them stay clean and sober. Think about Weight Watchers. It creates a community of people around the passion to live a more healthy lifestyle. Think about CrossFit. CrossFit creates a community around things, or what I like, Go Ruck, which was a community built around this idea of throwing on a weighted backpack and going out and doing exercises with other people. In all of these places, community is what helps people stick in when their own will gets weak. Community. It's all about community. So I hope that you're thinking about these things. I hope that you've been challenged as you've considered disciple making in your area. And if you're lacking in any of those things, we want to help you. We want to help you personally practice. We want to help you go wide. We want to help you help people go deep. We want to help you build community. Just reach out to us through the app or through our website, www.contagiousdisciplemaking.com, and we can help you figure out what to do, the things that you need to do, to figure out what you need to do to go from being fragile in making disciples to being anti-fragile. Guess what? You don't have to be alone. We want to walk this road with you. You've been listening to the CDM podcast. I'm Paul Watson. I would really appreciate it if you would like, share, 5-star rate, and review this on the podcasting platform of your choice. It's amazing how a little review, a 5-star rating can really encourage us and help other people see the value in taking their time to develop, to listen to this content and apply it to their life in order to make disciples. I hope that you'll stick around for part 2 of this podcast, where we're going to talk about what it takes to build community. So stay tuned.